In today's video, we're going to try out a new toy, the new tablet scope from FNIRSI. And as always with my new toys, we're going to try it out on real vintage projects. Something I would actually use it for. So let's get the scope out of the box and see if it's any good. And a full disclaimer here, they're not sponsoring this video, but it was sent in for free. So this is basically a tablet scope with a built-in signal generator, frequency response analyzer and a spectrum analyzer. I'm not going to go over all the details, so feel free to pause the video if you want any of the specs I'm going to skip here. But it's basically a 350 MHz 2-channel scope. The signal generator can do 14 standard functions. It will do sine waves up to 50 MHz and some other waveforms up to 10, 5 or 3 MHz. Amplitude is up to 5 volts peak to peak. It has a 7-inch IPS display with a resolution of 1024 by 600. It has a built-in battery and it will charge it in 2 to 5 hours. And the standby time is 3 hours. That should be more than sufficient for some vintage computer restorations. So the specs looks pretty good. So let's have a look inside. Well, it comes in a really nice case. This is actually a hard case, so should be pretty good for protecting the scope. We've got a manual and actual scope. Let's peel that off. As a YouTuber, there is one annoying thing with all modern scopes. It's the highly reflective display. So I'm going to add an anti-glare filter. I just buy it in large sheets for laptops and cut them to size. This is just a YouTuber thing, so not a problem for most people. I'll install it off camera to get it reasonably well aligned. Well, definitely got some dust in between, but now it should be a lot easier for you guys to see what's on the scope. We've got a nifty stand, pretty good one, and it has some rubber feet, so it doesn't slide around on the bench. That's good. And it does have a couple of bumpers in the corners. That should be enough to protect it. We've got a charger, charging cable, cable with alligator clips, presumably for the signal generator, and 2 standard probes. I have a whole bunch of these. They're actually pretty okay. Yeah, these are pretty standard. They are marked as good for up to 350 MHz. Perfectly usable. The manual is in multiple languages, and it seems to be pretty good. We're not spoiled with good manuals nowadays. Yeah, this looks pretty good. So let's see if it's charged. It is, awesome. So we can start using it right away. One of the features that is important to me is how fast it starts, because my big fancy scope takes forever to boot up, and it's super annoying. But as you noticed, this one is up and running in about 3 seconds. That is excellent. Every scope should be this quick. Another reason why I gladly accepted this scope is because it's so small and handy and runs off batteries. I constantly move around on the bench, so unplugging and moving my big scope is extremely annoying. For that reason alone, I have lately been using the DPOS350P. And even this tiny scope here will do most stuff that I need to do. And whenever I need the fancy features of the DHO800, I'll bring it out and have a coffee while I wait for it to boot up. But in most cases, these small scopes are more than sufficient. So the main advantage of this upgrade here is that it will be a lot easier for you guys to see what's on the screen, because this display is way brighter than the 180H. I actually had to remove the anti-glare filter on this scope here because it was so hard to see on camera, but I can clearly see on my preview display that this is perfectly visible even with the anti-glare filter installed. Before we get started, let's quickly check how easy it is to use. I have connected channel 1 to the signal generator, so down here we've got channel 1. We can choose between 1x, 10x and 100x, and we've got AC and DC coupling here. And here we have the time base and the signal generator, so running 1 kilohertz. at 1 volt peak to peak. Let's increase it to 5 volts. And here's our auto mode. Yeah, it totally works. As expected, of course. So the first thing we need to do is to adjust the probe. As you can see on the signal here, the tool is included. Probes are very easy to adjust at the connector for the probe. And then just turn it. That's good enough for me. Up here we have some settings. We have automatic shutdown. I'm gonna turn that off. We also have USB connect. Okay, so it can be connected to an external display. That can be useful. And here we have functions. And we have capture outputs. And we've got a diskette, so let's press it and see if it will save. I think it did. And then we have a measure menu here. And we've got all the usual stuff. Vmax, Vmin, and so on. Individually for both channels. And then we have a browser. So we have a picture browser, and a waveform browser, and a capture browser. And here's our capture. You can also do a screenshot here. It turns up in the picture browser. That could be handy for YouTubing. And down here we have the trigger, so by pushing on it we can move the trigger point. Yeah, totally works. Okay, I think that's all the basics we need to know to use the scope for all the usual stuff. By the way, I love that display. I'm viewing this from a pretty bad angle because I have the camera in front of the scope, but I can still very clearly see the image. Very impressive display. I noticed on my preview that it's a bit darker on camera than what it actually is, but I can assure you that is a great display. It's not as dark as you see it on camera. Okay, let's try that scope out on something that's broken next. Luckily I've got plenty of broken machines here. So if I remember correctly, this machine is a black screen. Let's do a quick test and check. So the fan spins up in the power supply. That's actually all it does. So yeah, this is definitely a black screen. Okay, I connected the speaker. Let's see if we get any beeps. Yes, we do. That sounds like a perfectly working machine, actually. So, this seems to be a graphics issue. Let's get that motherboard out and see if we can find the fault. Well, we've got 2 channels to play with, so let's use them both. I have set the scope up by connecting it to a working machine here. So the yellow trace is red and the blue trace is green. On a working IBM PS2 model 70. For a comparison like this, you obviously don't need an identical machine. Any old VGA signal should do. Now let's remove one of the probes here and connect them to our broken machine. Okay, so the blue trace is now connected to our troublesome model 70 here. Let's turn the machine on and see what we get. Okay, it went high. I'll skip ahead a few seconds and see if this will change. By the way, we can switch between channel 1 and channel 2 here. Let's check the trigger. No, we're getting basically nothing from the broken machine. So how about green? No, we're getting nothing here. And blue. Same thing with blue here. Okay, so we're not getting any color information from the broken board. I moved the probe to a vertical sync on the working machine. Let's do the same thing with the broken board. No, absolutely nothing. Okay, so we seem to have a mostly working board here without any graphics. I don't have the schematics, but we know the VGA circuitry is up in this corner here. So on these 2 PCBs, we've got the VRAM. This chip here is the DAC. This big guy here is the VGA controller. These 2 crystals here might also be for these chips here. We have unfortunately had one of these go bad in another board. So I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed that it's one of the other chips. Okay, I'll start with the visual inspection. Well, there is actually something glossy on the board here. I'll try to get it on camera. That could be nothing, but it could also be electrolyte. Well, I can't see obvious leakage here, but I guess this crap here could be a tiny bit of electrolyte. Well, whatever that glossy stuff is, it has found its way through the vias to the other side of the board. So there is some of that stuff on this side too. Okay, I found another cap on the other side of the board that looks a bit suspicious. There is some kind of gunk here. Looks like it could be flux, but it's still sticky. Flux this old tends to be really hard and difficult to remove from the board, but this stuff is sticky. This one too looks a bit funny. There is something on the PCB right next to this cap, but I couldn't tell you what it is. It could just be old flux, but it could quite possibly be cap juice too. But we need to start somewhere, so let's just start with this cap here that sits next to the DAC. Let's measure this guy in circuit and see what we get. So this cap is 22 micro 16 volt cap. Well, I'm not getting 22 micro, but since the cap is in circuit, we can't trust this. Let's see if we got lucky. Well, there is something glossy underneath that cap, so either electrolyte or just flux. Let's see what it measures. 22.2 micro. That's pretty spot on. So that was probably flux. Now let's check what ESR we get. 1.27. That is a very good ESR for a 22 micro 16 volt cap. So unfortunately, this cap is probably good. Well, apparently I had a new cap in my stash, so we might as well replace it. Let's do a quick test with that fresh cap before we continue. And as expected, no difference. Okay, let's install the main suspects in socket next. So first I'm going to heat up the board to 130°C. While the board heats up, I'm going to add some leaded solder to all the pins. This tends to make the desoldering much quicker and easier. Some of the pins are bent, so before I desolder any of the components, I'm going to heat the solder up and straighten up those pins. The easiest way to do this is by using desoldering needles, and now we can just desolder all the components with the desoldering gun. With the board at 130°C, this is a quick and easy job. With all the pins desoldered, I'm going to grab a desoldering needle with a large enough hole to go on top of the pin, but thin enough to fit in the through hole. And then I'm going to feel if any of the pins are still stuck before I start pulling components off the board. Several of the components are a bit stubborn, so I'm going to add some heat with the Rework station, and hopefully this will get them unstuck. And it dropped. So here is our first VRAM module. Second module. Never use any force when removing chips, because if one of the pins is stuck to one of the pads, it will rip the pad off. So I'm just very gently tapping on the pins. The DAC is really stubborn, so I'm going to heat the pins up on this side of the board too. And it's off the board. Okay, so first we need a 28-pin socket for the DAC. I find it easier to just install several sockets in one go, instead of having to reheat the board several times. I don't bother with proper crystal sockets. Instead I just push the two middle pins out from regular sockets on each side. That's basically what crystal sockets are anyways. For the RAM modules, I'm going to use machined pin headers, like so. So all that's left to do now is to solder all the sockets. Let's keep things nice and neat and clean that flux off right away. That's clean enough for me. Okay, let's reinstall the components on the board. So this guy is a 28.32 MHz crystal and a 25.17 MHz crystal in this socket. These modules have identical part numbers, so I'm going to assume they are identical. Let's see if they will fit in the homemade dip socket. Yeah, they fit perfectly. They sit firmly. For a brief period, RAM was installed this way actually, but that standard never caught on. So what do you guys think? I'm going to place my bets on the DAC. So let's replace it with a freshly tested chip. Let's connect some power to the board. Okay, all bets are off. Oh no, my guess was wrong. It's not the DAC. We still have no graphics. Okay, so the DAC was good. Let's pull one of the VRAM modules and install a freshly tested module. Here goes. Oh no, it's not one of those 4 VRAM chips either. Crap. Okay, let's pull that second VRAM module off the board. I only have one of these loose, so I'm going to reinstall the module we have removed, and hopefully both of them are not dead. Here goes. Oh no, it's not one of those chips either. Well, I'm not sure if these crystals are part of the VGA circuitry, but being so close to the 2 main chips, it's very likely. So let's swap them next. Here goes. Oh no, unfortunately that probably means it's the custom IBM chip. Now that sucks. Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. So let's add some flux to that chip. Let's be nice to this board and chip, and add some chip quick. This will make the chip come off much quicker while using a lot less heat. This stuff has such a low melting point. With the board at 130°C, I don't need much heat to remove that chip. But let's add some for good measure. You can always poke the chip to see if it's loose. And sure enough. So with the board at 130°C, this stuff just stays molten. So I can actually remove most of it before I start cleaning with wick. I'll just scoop it up on a piece of paper. So if you ever wonder what the Terminator guy was made of, apparently it's chip quick. So now we know, chip quick T1000. I'll add some fresh flux next, and then I'll use some wick to make sure all of the chip quick is gone before we can install the tested chip. I'll scoop that flux up again. Okay, board is nice and clean. Let's add fresh flux again, and a freshly tested video controller. I'm gonna have to align it off camera because the camera is in the way. Okay, chip aligned. Let's add more flux, and then I'll use a large flat tip and just drag solder all the pins. This will create lots of bridges, but I will ignore them for now and remove them when the chip is soldered. Okay, all 4 sides have been drag soldered, so now we can remove the bridges by adding some flux and then pulling all the excess solder to one side, and then just pulling it off the pins and then cleaning the tip. If this doesn't work on the first attempt, just add more flux and eventually it will come off. Okay, all the bridges have been removed. So let's scoop up that flux one last time. Okay, well, it's hard to get anything in focus at this distance, but I did a visual inspection and all the solder joints look fine. So we're all good. Okay, everything reinstalled on the board. Here goes. Unbelievable. It's not that custom chip either. Oh, come on. Seriously. We have basically tested the entire VGA circuitry. Seriously, what the heck is wrong with this board? Well, I don't know enough about the BIOS to know if it can affect the graphics. But the board is posting, so I guess this is unlikely. But let's swap it anyways. Then we will know for sure. Let's find out. No, nothing wrong with that BIOS. Let's turn the machine on with the speaker and the diskette drive attached. I have the reference disk in the drive too. So we've got normal beeps. So it's probably counting up the RAM now. Now it seeks and it reads the disk. And it boosts the disk. So that beep you just heard, that is the beep that the reference disk does when we get that blue screen with the IBM logo. So this damn board is fully functional, except that it doesn't show any graphics. And all the major components in the graphic circuitry, they are now tested. And this is a multi-layer board, so most of the traces, they are inside the board. So I can't just trace it and see where everything is connected either. I think I have done this test before, but let's check again and make sure. So this is an 8514A graphics card. Let's quickly check how it behaves. Yeah, still a black screen. Let's do some half guessing next. I found the schematics for a reasonably similar board. And we should have the color signals on the first 3 pins on the DAC. So let's check these pins. Nothing, nothing, and nothing. Okay, so I guess that rules out bad connector and probably a whole bunch of passives underneath the board here. The DAC is probably connected with pin 5 to 12 to the main video chip, probably through some resistors and possibly through 74-244. So underneath the board here we have pin 5 to 12 marked, and the main video chip is underneath here. So let's do some tracing and see if we can find something. Okay, so this resistor here is connected to pin 5. It's marked 33R. So let's check it. And we're getting 33R. So that resistor is good. Okay, and then it actually has a visible trace here. And it's going to this via here. And then that via comes up here and connects directly to the main video chip. So no 744 between on this board. And I'm gonna guess all of these pins are connected to one of these resistors. Yep, they sure are. So they are connected through a resistor to the main video chip. And I can actually see that the traces are going to these vias. So they are basically all connected directly to the main video chip. Pin 4 on the DAC in that schematic is connected to a transistor. The only transistor I have in this area is this guy here. Oh, sure enough, it's connected. Let me see if I can identify that guy. Okay, and this guy is marked 1AMV. And I managed to identify it as an NPN transistor. So let's check it. 0.68 and 0.64-ish. Unfortunately, that transistor is good. On those schematics, this transistor is also connected to a voltage regulator. But on this board, it's actually connected to 2 voltage regulators. Okay, apparently these are TL431s. So there's no quick way to check these in circuits. So let's do some more chip swapping. I'm just gonna grab these with a rework station. Add some flux. And borrow these guys from a freshly tested board. I'll solder one of the pins. And then check if they are aligned before I solder the remaining pins. Here goes. And unfortunately, those chips were good too. Crap. I had a second look in those schematics. And on that board, the 3 color pins are connected to an LM339. And that's what we have here, just next to the DAC. In the schematics, they are also passing through some resistors. Okay. So pin 1 is connected to this resistor, pin 2 to this resistor, and presumably, yep, pin 3 connected to this resistor. They are marked 150R, 149, 149, and 150. So resistors are good. And same thing with this guy here. There's no quick and easy way to test it in circuit, so we're gonna have to swap it. Okay, new tested chip installed. Here goes. Ah, no. Apparently it's not that cheap either. Seriously, what a stubborn board. Okay, I noticed in the schematics that pin 1 should go high. Unfortunately it does. Unfortunately, that's where the similarities end with the schematics I found on this board. So the only thing I can do at this point is to just swap random chips, not really knowing if they affect the VGA circuitry. That is not going to be fun to watch. So I'll probably keep fixing this board off camera and then let you know when I have found a bad chip. And as always, I'd love to hear your guesses. So keep guessing and write your guess in the comments. But this is as far as we can get today. And I'll get back to this board in the next Model 70 video. Don't forget the subscribe button before you leave. And I'll see you guys again next week.